used to love Halloween. Everything about it stirred up good memories. The cool autumn breezes, the crunching sounds of stepping on orange and yellow fallen leaves, the smells of cider and pumpkin spice, carnivals and candy corn and creepy slasher movies, taking in the decorations, jack-o'-lanterns and hanging ghosts, plastic skeletons and graveyard markers with cheesy jokes adorning people's lawns, witches and scarecrows and skeletons around every corner. But after what I went through that night, that Halloween, I'll never look at any of those things the same way. And I know I'll never look at All Hallows Eve the same way again either. Honestly, I'm surprised I lived to tell this story. Despite the time since, I've never spoken it aloud to anyone before. They wouldn't believe it, and they'd call me crazy. Putting it down on paper seems like the closest thing to a confession I can manage. And even that is going to take some courage. Part of me worries that reliving that night will give some power to those things. As if by speaking of them, I might summon them to return. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll try to start from the beginning. Or, at least as close to the beginning as I can. It was Halloween night, and my friend Bobby and I were hanging out in his parents' basement, the TV on absently in the background, desperate for something to do. We had heard whispers of parties, but hadn't actually been invited to any of them. It was going to be a long, boring, lonely night for both of us, if we couldn't figure something out soon. "Holy shit, I got one," Bobby said suddenly, and I looked up from my own phone to see him holding his screen towards me. All Hallows Eve Bonfire Party, it said at the top, with a bunch of images from last year's event below that. A subheading read, "Monster Mash begins at midnight." Guess there's like a dance competition or something too. "Where's it at?" I asked, hoping it wasn't far. Neither one of us owned a vehicle. "Hollow's End," he answered, casually naming the notorious neighboring town. He might as well have suggested visiting Sentinel Island. Neither one of us had ever been there, or ever planned to go. Hollow's End was the absolute last place anyone around here wanted to visit. I began to say something, but he cut me off. "It says right here, anyone's welcome as long as they're a town resident," he went on. "But nobody there is going to know we don't live in the Hollow. We'll be in costumes, hiding our faces anyway." "I don't know, man. You've heard the rumors about that fucking place. Isn't that town, like, haunted or cursed or radioactive or something?" He just laughed at that. "Man, that's all such bullshit. You really believe those stories our parents used to tell us when we were kids? It's just some old town rivalry. Steve and Amy said they went over there 2 weeks ago to get lunch." Steve and Amy are full of shit. He thought about that briefly. "Yeah, probably. But this is the only fucking party we're gonna find tonight. You want to man up and go, or you want to sit around here all night watching old movies again?" When I hesitated, he held up the phone again, this time showing me a picture of some ladies dancing around a large fire wearing revealing Halloween costumes. I saw Velma, Princess Peach, and at least one Sailor Moon. That was all it took. I was sold. Fuck it, let's go. But we're getting pre-drunk first. I can't talk to girls if I'm sober. He didn't argue, producing a bottle of Fireball seemingly out of thin air. "Abracadabra, bitch," he said for some reason, and I found myself unable to stop laughing. 2 hours later, we found ourselves kicking up gravel, wandering down a deserted country road past a sign which read, "Welcome to Hollow's End." Beneath that, in brackets, it said, "If you live here." "What a weird town slogan," Bobby said, commenting on the sign. "It's like they forgot to include the rest of it. Shouldn't it be, if you lived here, you'd be home already? Or something like that?" I nodded, thinking of the more ominous interpretation of that welcome message. Welcome to those who live here. For those who don't, fuck right off or face the consequences. So what's the address for this party? I asked after a few moments of silently scuffling down the road beside him. How much further is it? We were both pretty tipsy by this point, and Bobby struggled to pull his phone from his pocket, blinking at the screen a few times before being able to see it clearly. Shit, it doesn't say. I stopped in my tracks and grabbed his arm. What? Seriously? How could it not have an address? And more importantly, how could you not notice that before? We just walked all the way out here for nothing. We'd both thrown on our costumes from the year prior, since it did seem to be a requirement to enter the party. As a car drove past on an adjacent street, I thought about how silly we probably looked, standing there arguing. Me, a giant pot-bellied raccoon, and Bobby dressed as Jason from Friday the 13th. We'll find it, man, he yelled, pulling off his hockey mask to reveal his sweaty face. Look, it's a bonfire, right? So, once we get close, we'll see it. That did seem to make some sense, but it was still creeping me out walking into this weird town in the dead of night on Halloween. It felt sacrilegious somehow, in complete defiance of everything my parents had ever taught me. Regardless, I huffed in agreement and we kept walking. The two of us passed a Mickey back and forth as we went along the country road, our spirits picking up again slightly at the prospect of seeing a bonfire blazing somewhere in the distance. And sure enough, after another 20 minutes of walking, we saw it. A tall pyre burning in the middle of a cornfield to our right, far off in the distance. It was just barely visible as a glowing beacon of orange light on the horizon. That's gotta be it, Bobby said, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the corn. We could hear the faint sounds of laughter and many voices chattering off in that direction. Come on, man, let's go. You sure? I asked, following him. Of course, dude. What the hell else would it be? A moment later, we were enveloped by the tall, looming shadows of the corn. The laughter and voices from the party had quickly dissipated, and I could hear crickets chirping from all around us, louder and louder as we made our way into the field, almost drowning out our words with an eerie, unsettling cacophony. I didn't understand why I couldn't hear the party anymore, and why I could only hear those crickets. I was even more uneasy than before, but I didn't know how to form my concerns into words, so I just went along with them, my fear bubbling inside me like a kettle coming to a boil. The leaves and shoots of the cornstalks brushed against me, tickling my neck and tousling my hair as I stumbled through them. Bobby looked back at me from up ahead and tossed me the small bottle of booze. I caught it and took another uneasy swig, then slipped the whiskey into my costume's side pocket. We walked through the dry corn for what felt like a long time before Bobby finally spoke up, sounding a bit worried. We should be able to see it by now, he muttered uneasily. Straight ahead, right? I think so, I said, trying to recall the position of the fire in the distance. Maybe a little to the left? He shook his head. I thought it was straight this way. A sound of laughter could be heard from nearby, and we both flinched at the noise, stopping in our tracks. I stumbled into Bobby, nearly knocking him over. He looked back at me, annoyed. Watch where you're going, dumbass. What the fuck was that sound? I don't know, man. Sound like a kid, maybe. At this time of night? There's no kids out here. No? What about the children of the corn? He asked, trying to spook me by reaching behind me and tapping my other shoulder. I didn't even flinch. He was always trying to scare me, and I'd grown immune by this point. I punched his arm and shoved him in the direction I thought we should be heading. Mostly, I just wanted to get away from that laughter, though. It sounded like it was coming from our right. As we stumbled over the adjacent rows, cutting through the corn, I felt spider webs and insects on my face, crawling through my hair, and tried to brush them away. I could only imagine how rough my costume was going to look after all this. Passing quickly through a row, I stumbled when I saw something off in the distance, to my right. Tripping, I landed on my face, spitting out dirt a moment later. Bobby was still moving quickly away from me, and I called after him, but he didn't seem to hear me. It was like he was in a trance, marching forward deeper into the corn. I called after him again, this time in a loud, hissing whisper. I didn't want to call out more forcefully, out of fear of attracting the entity I'd seen a moment earlier. There had been someone standing about 50 yards away, straight down one of the corn rows we'd passed. It looked like a fairy princess holding a bloody knife. Just a Halloween costume, I told myself. You're dressed like a giant raccoon, for fuck's sake. They just got creative with one of those plastic prop knives from Spirit Halloween. I stood up and went to look over there again, but they were gone. Weird. Bobby was gone too, I realized. And I was alone out here in the middle of this giant cornfield, in this creepy-ass town that really didn't like outsiders. Perfect. I figured I'd come this far, so I might as well continue on a bit further. I followed Bobby's path, hoping he'd manage to find the bonfire party. But the longer I walked, the more I began to feel scared that I was heading in the wrong direction. I changed course and began heading to my right again, in the direction we'd been going at the start. And after 10 minutes of walking, I found myself back at the road again. Despite the physical impossibility of this, it was the same one we'd started on. I was sure of it. There was the same mailbox shaped like a fishing lure across the street, and the same white farmhouse with a porch swing rocking steadily in the wind. An old, familiar weather vane atop the roof made rusted sounds as it was scuttled by the breeze. The bonfire was clearly visible in the cornfield, right where it had been before. 100 yards of walking in a straight line would take me to it, but I had gone easily 3 times that distance previously. None of this made any sense. I had walked in a straight line, more or less, but I'd somehow traveled in a circle despite all that. It was like the cornfield had a mind of its own, and had rearranged itself to spit me back out at the entrance. I almost turned around and headed home, too uneasy to wander into that cornfield alone again. A night at home watching old Halloween movies sounded very inviting suddenly. That was when I saw the girl dressed in a Velma costume waving at me. Her short haircut, or wig of black hair, bobbed up and down as she bounced with excitement. Other things bounced too, and I found myself taking slow, sleepwalker steps toward her. "Come on!" she yelled. "They're starting!" She began walking into the corn, and I ran after her, hoping she knew where she was going. Bobby was probably already at the party, I reasoned with myself, and I had just gotten turned around in a circle because I was drunk. We'd come all this way to go to a party, and by God, I was going to follow through. The corn closed in around me once again, but this time, it didn't seem as ominous and frightening as before. There was a clear path forward, and a beautiful girl up ahead was beckoning me onwards. Her short skirt blew in the wind and seemed to tease me with what was underneath, as she glanced back again and again, giving a flirty smile each time. "Almost there," she called, and a few seconds later the field opened up into a clearing. I found myself in a crowd of costumed people, their faces hard to glimpse in the low, flickering light of the bonfire. That blaze was roaring high, as partygoers threw more and more fuel onto it. Entire dead trees, shrubs, and even old pieces of furniture were being tossed into the inferno, and it grew larger and larger as I stood there. I'd never seen a fire so tall or so large in all my life. It was like something out of Burning Man. Get lost easily? A soft, sweet voice asked from beside me in a playful tone, and I looked over to see the pretty, round face of a girl with glasses. Velma. You're lucky I spotted you before the Watchers in the Corn did. Might have mistaken you for an outsider. Her voice was hard to make out among the other voices in the crowd, and I was sure I'd misheard her. Until later on, when I'd start to question everything. She was handing me a red Solo cup filled with a drink. I took it from her, surprised to feel that the liquid inside the cup was warm. Maybe some sort of apple cider or mulled wine? Thanks, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She was very pretty. I'm Amanda, she said, cheersing me with her own drink. Steve, I replied. Nice costume, Steve. Thanks, I said again, my vocabulary limited in the face of this beauty. You too. You look great. My voice cracked on the word great. She giggled and put her hand on my arm. My legs went weak. Another young lady approached me from the other side. She had blonde hair with pink highlights, and was wearing a simple black and gray costume that reminded me of Marceline the Vampire Queen from Adventure Time. She smiled at Amanda, revealing long, pointed canines that looked very real. Who's your friend? She asked Velma. This is Steve, she said, showing me off. I laughed awkwardly as they both looked at me. What do you think, Jen? Marceline the Vampire Queen giggled and took a longing look at the flesh of my neck. I looked away, feeling exposed and strangely embarrassed. My face burning, I took a sip of my drink. The punch was warm and unpleasant. There was a hint of iron in the taste. I grimaced. What is this? I asked. The girls giggled again, and Velma stood on her toes to plant a quick peck on my lips. You're cute, she said. Catch you later. And the two of them linked arms and laughed as they sauntered away, disappearing into the crowd again. Shit, I muttered, annoyed with myself for not being able to keep the conversation going. They'd probably gone off to hang out with their friends again. I really needed to get better at talking to girls. I was awful at it. Ah well, I figured. I'll just go look for Bobby. He's gotta be around here somewhere. I roamed around the bonfire, looking for a tall, skinny guy wearing a hockey mask. There were plenty of interesting costumes here, for sure. But I didn't see Bobby's anywhere. I saw a guy wearing a giant, furry blue costume who had to be at least 7.5 feet tall. Another had a very convincing dogman costume that made him look like a human-puppy hybrid. There was a guy who was very clearly supposed to be an alien. But when I passed him and said, "Great alien costume" to him, he just huffed and told me he was from Earth. Weird. I wandered around for a while longer until I got tired and decided to sit down for a minute. There were large tree stumps and wide logs arranged near the drinks for people to use as stools. I picked one out and carefully set myself down on it, the log wobbling precariously on the uneven grass. Hey, a tall guy covered in tattoos said from next to me. I haven't seen you around town. I'm Lucien. He stuck out his hand, and I shook it while taking in the rest of him. Tattoos of Nordic runes and symbols covered his hands. Over 6 feet tall, with long, black dreadlocks, he seemed to be going for a predator look. A nearby mask with the signature alien face carved from plastic confirmed this. Steve, I said. Great costume. You too, he laughed. Not sure how Avanza's gonna feel about it, though. Avanza? I questioned. Who's that? He looked at me strangely. Man, you really must be new. Avanza, dude. You know, a huge fucking raccoon guy? Talks trash and fights crime? What? This guy had clearly been dipping into some psychedelics tonight. I decided to just play along. I mean, oh, right, that guy. No, he said it's cool. Oh, good. Because you do not want to get on that guy's bad side. He'll bite your fucking face off. If I'm a criminal, right? He looked at me as if to say this was not always the case. Right. Anyways, have you seen my buddy Bobby around here anywhere? Tall guy wearing a hockey mask? Nah, haven't seen him. But if I do, I'll tell him you're looking for him. Thanks, I said, leaving my warm, oddly flavored drink behind as I stood up. I did not want the rest of it. I wandered away, reaching into my pocket to pull out the half-full Mickey. I took a swig from it, the burning taste washing away the copper iron flavor of the punch. Whatever had been in that drink, it was oddly familiar. What was it? Cloves, maybe? My eyes were scanning the clearing desperately, still looking for Bobby anywhere. He was nowhere to be seen. I did several laps around the fire, taking in all the strange sights and sounds of the party while I did. A tall guy wearing a ferret costume and army fatigues was refilling a candy bowl on one of the tables. I went over to him. He looked like he might be in charge. "Excuse me," I said, tapping him on the shoulder. "Have you seen my buddy wandering around?" "What's he look like?" he asked, not turning around, still fiddling with the bags of candy and making sure everything looked neat and tidy. I got the impression of someone with a military background, and not just judging by the fatigues. He's wearing a Jason mask. You know, like a hockey mask? Like the killer from Friday the 13th? The guy turned around to face me and scrunched up his ferret face in thought. I didn't understand how it was possible, but the mask he was wearing wrinkled and moved just like the face of a real animal. Some kind of animatronics or puppetry? However he was doing it, it was like a feat of magic. "Check over there." He pointed towards a darker corner of the clearing. "See if Ricky knows anything." I started wandering away from the bonfire and into the darkness, towards a small crowd of people and a few flickering torches. They were chattering excitedly, and as I got closer, I saw a large rain barrel was set up in the middle of the group. One man had his hands tied behind his back and was dunking his head into the water, which filled the barrel. "Nice try, Hunter," the man running the game said as I got up close. "Time's up, buddy. Better luck next time." I was so distracted by the sight of all this that I completely forgot about my friend for a minute. I hadn't played this old game since I was a kid, and I was suddenly flooded with good memories. I remembered bobbing for apples at our school, and at the Boy Scouts Halloween party when I was a kid. For those who don't know, in this traditional Halloween game, people have their hands tied behind their back and have to blindly dunk their head into a barrel filled with water and apples. The goal is to catch one of the floating apples in the barrel between your teeth, and to pull it out without using your hands. "Who's next?" the man running the game called out, and I immediately volunteered. "Can I try?" I asked, stepping forward. Although he turned to look at me, his eyes didn't settle on my face, and after a few moments I realized he was blind. Still, he seemed to take me in as if he was inspecting me in some way, appraising me, just not with his eyes. "Come on over," he said, getting the rope ready to tie my hands behind my back. "I don't recognize your voice. Are you new around here?" "Yeah," I stammered. Just moved to town. I'm Steve." "Ricky," he said in a friendly voice, gently tying my hands back so I couldn't cheat. Suddenly I felt oddly exposed, and hoped no one would recognize me as an outsider. "Haven't played this game since I was a kid," I said. What's the prize, anyway? An apple? He laughed. What else? I snickered at that. The guy who had just been playing gave me a hearty slap on the back. I turned and looked to see another extremely lifelike and realistic mask. This one of a minotaur. And the tall guy even had fancy, furry, costumed legs to match. Was he standing on stilts? Or was this town just full of abnormally tall people? Maybe the rumors about radioactivity weren't unfounded after all. Let's see how it's done, he laughed, pushing me towards the barrel with an inhumanly strong shove. In the darkness, I couldn't see the apples, and just went for it. I plunged my head into the cool water and began to search for the round pieces of fruit with my teeth. Gasping for air between attempts, I wondered how much time I had left. After what felt like minutes of desperately snapping at empty water, my teeth found purchase on something squishy and round, but pretty small for an apple. Was it a crab apple or a grape? I lifted my head out of the water to the cheers and applause of the group around me. My hands were untied, and I was given several high fives as I pulled the strange, squishy piece of fruit from my mouth. My eyes tried to focus on it as the crowd erupted all around me. And as I took in the shape of it, the color, the texture, I felt my legs getting weak. It was an eyeball. And not a fake one either. Vasculature and nerves could be seen dangling from the backside of it. The color of the iris was so familiar. I had seen it 1,000 times before. Even in the low light of the torches and the bonfire, I recognized that light gray shade of blue. I felt my gorge rising and tried to keep my dinner down as it fell from my trembling hand and someone replaced it with a fresh, ripe apple. They squeezed my fist tight around it, and I felt more people clapping me on the back and giving congratulations. And as my eyes drifted upwards to read the banner which hung above the barrel, the apple toppled from my hand and fell to the grass, unnoticed by the others who had already moved on to the next participant. The white sign fluttered in the breeze, and I read the words written upon it again and again until they started to make sense. And even then, they didn't. Not really. Bobbing for Bobby? For apples. Bobby's name had been written beneath several others that had been crossed out, as if he were not the first victim of this game. I started to stumble away from that crowd, unsure where I was going or what I was doing. Behind me, I could hear the raucous voices of the crowd, cheering on the next participant in the sick game they were playing. All right, your turn, Tyson. Show the kids how it's done. When I glanced back, I saw a man wearing a leather jacket with a skeletal face, his glowing eyes reflecting back at me, as if something was lit and burning inside his skull, like a candle inside a jack-o'-lantern. An effect that no costume or makeup I'd ever seen could possibly achieve. What was this place? Who were these people? Of all the stories I'd heard of this horrifying town, none of them had prepared me for this. Confusion took hold of me, and I felt like I was in a daze. And not just from the alcohol. My legs were numb, and my stomach felt sick and queasy as I made my way back towards the bonfire. I didn't know where I was going anymore, or what I was doing. I just knew that somehow I needed to find what remained of my friend. I was praying he was still alive, being held captive somewhere nearby. Maybe, just maybe, I could free him, and we could both still escape somehow. Just as I was beginning to form a plan in my mind, there was a loud squeal of feedback from a set of speakers nearby, causing me to lose my train of thought. All right, folks. Is this thing on? All right, folks. It's that time of night you've all been waiting for. A voice was calling from near the fire. and I looked to see a man wearing a sheriff's deputy costume speaking to the assembled crowd. We were fortunate enough to get a stray visitor this year. And you know what that means. Fresh meat for you man-eaters.
Fresh meat, fresh meat, fresh meat, fresh meat.
The crowd began to chant those words back at him, louder and louder. The voices were deep and bellowing, and I saw that the crowd had changed from before. No one looked human anymore. Or maybe they never had been, and I just mistaken their twisted forms for costumes. I finally saw all the glowing red and yellow eyes, furry faces and sharp teeth all around, the huge, earth-shaking forms bellowing laughter. It all dawned on me right then. These were not people. They were monsters. Monsters living amongst people. They had shown me their true colors from the beginning. The familiar taste of the punch. It had been blood. And not just anyone's blood. It had been the vital fluids of my best friend in the world, Bobby. And right then, that was when I saw the rest of them. That was when I finally found my friend. Up on the small stage where the sheriff's deputy had been standing, creatures were showing off a scarecrow wearing a familiar ripped brown coat and black pants. Instead of a hockey mask, a lolling pumpkin head covered his face. But through the jack-o'-lantern's cut-open eyes, I could see who it was. Bobby. And somehow, he was still alive. But just barely. The creatures threw the scarecrow Bobby off the stage and into the throng. And like a crowd-surfing musician, they began to pass him overhead. I could hear my best friend moaning and screaming. And then his cries were drowned out by a band which began to play. The creatures on the stage had been tossed electric guitars and began to wail on them loudly.
I am Mastiff Nomad. Give it up for Jess and Xander on guitar.
The lead singer howled, in a dog-like voice. And, of course, I looked up to see he had a face and body to match. It was a dog man dressed in the torn leather of a musician. And then the music began to blast through unseen speakers, and the giant bodies of the monsters all around me started to move violently against each other, thrashing and wailing on one another, and pushing each other around in a mosh pit. Despite the danger, I tried to make my way forward into the crowd. I was hoping somehow I could get Bobby down from on top of the crowd so we could escape, but they were still tossing him around like a beach ball, and his screams were getting louder and louder. "Hey you," a familiar voice said from beside me, and I looked over to see Jen, or Marceline the Vampire Queen from earlier. Didn't think you'd stick around for this part. I was just heading out. She was smiling, her long canines showing in the bonfire light. "I gotta get my friend," I begged her, plowing ahead deeper into the crowd. "We should have never come here. This was a mistake." She grabbed me, reaching out lightning quick. Her fingernails dug into the skin of my hand, pulling me back. She had stopped smiling, her face now serious. "Who's your friend?" I pointed up to the pumpkin-headed scarecrow being passed atop the crowd. "Him, Bobby!" Her hand was suddenly no longer holding mine. When I looked back, she was gone. "Shit," I muttered, not realizing how bad my mistake had been. Not yet, anyways. I got closer and closer, until I could almost reach out and grab my friend's hand. And then, just as I was about to grab hold of him, the music picked up and began to play faster and louder. Some punk rock rendition of the Monster Mash, with actual ghouls and vampires jumping on stage to perform various lines. The crowd was forming the most volatile circle mosh pit I'd ever seen. The many large bodies around me were thrashing and crashing into each other faster and faster, and Bobby was screaming even louder than before. As the music came to a crescendo, I looked up to see him being pulled in a few different directions all at once. Blue, furry hands were grabbing him from one end, yanking on his arms, while another set of scaled reptilian hands were pulling him from the other side, ripping his legs off. His pumpkin head was pulled off next, along with the contents underneath. A loud, wet tearing sound could be heard, as Bobby's screams were cut off abruptly. Hot, sticky blood splashed my face as entrails slopped to the ground. And then chewing, slurping sounds predominated, while the music raged on. I started to back away, my gorge rising. Bodies were crashing into me and sending me careening in every direction, and I struggled desperately to right myself. The world was spinning, and I felt like I might pass out. After seeing all this carnage and mayhem, after drinking the blood of my best friend, and feeling the squish of his eyeball between my teeth, all the memories from that night came flooding over me, as the squealing feedback of a microphone drowned out all other noise. "Hello? Hello, everyone? Attention, please," a woman's voice was saying from the stage, prompting confused sounds from all around. "I'm sorry to interrupt this year's events, but this is an emergency." The faces in the crowd all turned to look at her, and I found myself looking up at her as well. It was Jen, the woman from earlier. The woman who I'd told the truth. The truth about not being from Hollow's End. "There's another outsider in our midst. He's right over there, in that giant bloody raccoon costume."
"Who the fuck is this jabroni?"
said an angry voice from beside me, and I looked to see a much more realistic, giant, furry raccoon. But his pointed, sharp teeth were real, and his long claws looked real too. He threw his red solo cup to the grass, spilling red liquid everywhere.
"I came here tonight to do two things,"
he began to say to me.
"Get him, Avanza!"
somebody yelled, and the bandit-masked creature snarled and started the second part of his threat. But I was already running by that point, so I didn't hear it. I cut through the corn, hearing the sounds of heavy footfalls coming after me. A roaring, angry mob of monsters was coming for me, and judging by what I'd just seen, they were going to do horrible, horrifying, disgusting things to me once they caught me. After about 100 steps, I felt myself getting winded. The bulky costume was heavy with my best friend's blood and guts, weighing me down and making it difficult to move. But I didn't have any time to deal with that now. The footfalls were gaining on me, growing louder and faster as the road came into view up ahead. I could have sworn I felt the hot breath of something far taller than me on my neck, toying with me instead of killing me. I stumbled up a small hill, out of a ditch, and looked back to see my closest pursuer had tripped over a tree stump in the darkness. The Minotaur creature began to howl in pain and looked as if it had injured its leg. If not for that, I'd likely have been dead. That thing had been a lot faster than me. A few moments later, I was pounding pavement beneath my feet, gasping for air as I ran out of strength to run. A sign up ahead to my right read, "Now leaving Hollow's End. See you again soon." I dashed past the faded writing and stumbled over a pothole in the road, sending me crashing to the ground. This time, my adrenaline dump was gone, and I found myself too weak to stand up for a moment. The others weren't far behind. This was it. I was done for. At any second, strong hands would grab me, dragging me back towards that bonfire and the eviscerated remains of my once best friend. I cringed and closed my eyes, waiting for my fate. But it never came. When I looked up, slowly rising to my feet from the ground, I saw the assembled monsters standing around the sign, huddled at the border of Hollow's End, as if there were a magical line there, a boundary they could not cross. The faces looked sad, as if disappointed that they would not be able to eat me. Jen, or Marceline the Vampire Queen, was there, along with the big, furry blue thing who looked a bit like Sully from Monsters, Inc., only way more intimidating. The ferret soldier and the alien guy watched me alongside other, more frightening faces. I saw several creatures that stood at least 10 feet tall, and wondered how I hadn't figured out something was wrong with that party long before I did.
See you soon,
somebody said in a deep, gruff voice.
The Hollow will draw him back, just like it always does.
And then they all turned and began to walk away, back towards the fire. I made my way home, feeling like I'd just won the lottery and lost my best friend on the same night. I was alive, but I would never be the same again. Looking back on those words, all this time later, it seems like they were prophetic in a way. I'm not the same, and I never will be. My parents didn't understand why I was so withdrawn after that day, why I rarely went out, and why I never saw any of my other friends anymore. I couldn't tell them. Like I said before, I couldn't tell anyone the truth of what happened that night. No one would believe me. And now that a year has passed and Halloween is creeping up on us again, I found that other things said that night were prophetic too.
See you soon,
that voice had said. That monster's voice.
The Hollow will draw him back, like it always does.
And strangely, I find myself dreaming of that night in not unpleasant terms recently. The warm bonfire, the games and songs and dancing. For some reason, those things don't feel as scary anymore. They feel almost nostalgic. And as October 31st comes closer, I find myself being drawn back to that place. Back to the warm glow of the fire. Like a traveler returning to camp after a long journey in the wilderness. It doesn't make sense. I shouldn't want to go back there. But I do. And on Halloween this year, I am going back. Alone this time. Not for revenge or to get even with those creatures. Because I want to. I need to. Even if it kills me, I'm going back to the Hollow. Hoo-wee, that was quite a ride. None of it could possibly be true, of course. None at all. I just found this notebook with this weird story inside and thought I'd share it with y'all. Clearly, there is no such town anywhere on Earth. But for those of you who choose not to believe that, there could just be a town like this. And if you did feel like visiting Hollow's End, or perhaps even moving here, rest assured, we don't all eat people. Just the real monstery types like Frank, Swampy, the Wendigo, and, well, all the vampires, I guess, technically. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, if you want to help support the town and become a citizen of Hollow's End yourself, head on over to patreon.com/Jordan Grupe Horror to become a member and be featured in a story as a citizen for yourself. Directions to town are down in the description. More happenings from Hollow's End will be coming soon, so stay tuned. Happy Halloween, folks! Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.